Finally, the juice is back for week 11, and I'm ready for week 11. I'm ready for the fantasy football playoffs, and I hope you are too, and I hope you're going to make it. But first, before we get into week 11 in our week 10 recap, we got to let you know we still have our underdog pick of the day for the NHL, where we're 6-2, and you'd be up 5 units or over $500 if you were doing $100 bets if you were following along with us so far on these underdog picks. And starting today, November 12th, we will be dropping our NBA value picks of the day. Is somewhere where our model says Vegas is way off, and we're going to give it to you guys for free. And just so you know, we are hitting 68% of spreads so far this NBA season. Now let's get into our week 10 recap. And first, we gotta brag. Some of you might have been scared, but Jared Goff finished last week, week 10, as quarterback 3 with 31 fantasy points. He threw for 320 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns. And now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about a surprise. Kyle Monangai, and I'm definitely surprised. I definitely thought Monangai was going to get a larger snap share when DeAndre Swift came back last week, but he still only played 38% of snaps. He still gave you 9 fantasy points, which is only 1 lower than our projection with Swift in the game. So we're still basically right there. But you were saved with Monangai's early touchdown in that game. Now that we see Monangai is still only going to play about 30-40% of snaps with DeAndre Swift healthy, Monangai might be a stash for now, waiting for another DeAndre Swift injury if you're playing redraft. Or if you pay attention in Dynasty or Keeper, you should know that DeAndre Swift's contract for 2026 has a clause where the Bears have to pay him an additional $500,000 if he is on that roster in 2026. And some of us reading between the lines take that as Monangai might be the guy next year with DeAndre Swift finding a new team. For wide receiver last week, we had a wide receiver in the worst football game of all time, and I'm not surprised after seeing that game where his numbers stood, and that's Trey Tucker. Even Brock Bowers wasn't safe from a bust during that game. You should still at least put Trey Tucker in your flex spots. The Raiders play the Cowboys this week. The defensive matchup against the Cowboys should be a lot softer for the Raiders, which should mean that Tucker should play more towards what we expect from him. And finally, our tight end from last week, Dalton Kincaid. Dalton Kincaid got hurt, and I think that's 2 weeks in a row calling a dude who gets hurt, even though he was balling out during the game. Kincaid played 20% of snaps, but in those 26% of snaps, he gave you 5.7 PPR points. This will really hurt the Bills' offense, and it might be time to take a swing on Brenton Strange, who could be back this week or next week, or even Mark Andrews before your league's trade deadline, as I'm not much of a believer in Dawson Knox replacing Dalton Kincaid. Now let's get into week 11, and I'm going to start with a quarterback that is going to be surprising, I think, and that's Arizona Cardinals Jacoby Brissett. And I know it's crazy to say that name out there with top quarterbacks in football, but what if I were to tell you Jacoby Brissett is averaging over 25 fantasy points per game since taking over at quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals in week 6. During this stretch, Brissett has thrown 8 touchdowns to only 1 interception to go along with 280 passing yards per game. In week 11, Brissett and the Cardinals will welcome the injury-riddled San Francisco 49ers to town. Now, these aren't your usual 49ers. This team in 2025 have allowed the 8th most passing yards, 6th most passing touchdowns, while only grabbing 1 interception, which is second in the NFL, only to the Jets, who have 0. San Francisco runs a lot of cover 3 and cover 4 defense, which should be good news for the Arizona Cardinals and the continuing success for Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride, as a deep seam against cover 3 should be open for Marvin. Everything underneath should be available for McBride against the cover 4 defense. And this is why FTJ has this game as one of the highest scoring games of the week. So wouldn't you want the quarterback in that game? I would. Now, let's get to my boy, Oregon Duck, wide receiver Tez Johnson. And he was one of the biggest waiver wire pickups this week. But if you saw how he worked in the preseason, you knew this was going to happen if he got the opportunity. Now with Mike Evans gone and Chris Godwin not playing again for the past few weeks, we've seen Tez get a larger and larger role in this Tampa offense. Tez is averaging 14.2 PPR points since the Bucs lost Godwin and Evans. If he had done this for the entire season, then he would be tied with Chris Olave for 12th in PPR points per game among wide receivers. So that means he's putting up wide receiver 1 production in this stretch. Now the Bills, who the Bucs do face in week 11, run a lot of cover 2 and cover 3 defense, which are both beaten deep. This lines up terribly for Buffalo against Baker, who prefers to bomb the ball. Look out for another deep touchdown grab for Tez Johnson, and I would be dumb not to say the same for Emeka Egbuka, but I know you guys are starting him regardless. You might look at Buffalo's defense versus wide receivers and think this is a bad matchup, but you have to dig a little deeper. What good receiver quarterback combos have the Bills really seen besides Zay Flowers, Drake London, Rashee Rice, and you can even throw Jalen Waddle? Let me tell you, those 4 guys combined have averaged 22.56 PPR points against the Bills this season. Now, throw Tez Johnson into your lineup in week 11. Let's go Ducks. Now, usually I'll throw in a running back, someone that pops out in our projections, but I'm going to be honest, we'll throw the rankings up on the screen during this little part right here, but there's really no running backs that stand out as anything crazy this week. So if you would start a guy at your running back 2 spot, start him there. If you would start him in your flex, start him there. Nothing is really popping out this week at running back. I'm just being honest. So let's get to tight end. Colston, Loveland, Chicago Bears, and I'm here to tell you about Colston Loveland. Do not freak out about the last game. Last week was Loveland's lowest snap share since week 6 against the Commanders, and it was the first time Komet out-snapped him since that same week. I think this has more to do with the game script and the scheme to add additional blocking against the Giants' good young edge rusher. It was also Luther Burden's return, who saw a 20% increase in his own snap share, so there could actually be more of a correlation between Loveland snaps and Burden snaps than with Komet. Chicago now heads to Minnesota, where the Bears could once again use Komet to help protect Caleb Williams against those crazy Brian Flores blitzes. But the good news for you Loveland owners is that Minnesota has allowed the 3rd most receiving touchdowns to tight ends this season. Minnesota also plays a good amount of cover 2 and cover 3 defense. Obviously, it'll be hard for Loveland to take advantage of that cover 2 zone defense unless they run him deep down the middle, but he should feast against that cover 3. Something else to look out for is Ben Johnson is somewhat of an offensive genius. He knows the Vikings will be looking to take off Caleb Williams' head, and to counter this, Ben Johnson could be looking for a lot of quick, short passes to attack Minnesota. Think of what Aaron Rodgers did earlier this season against Minnesota in Europe, and I think that could spell a lot of good things for Colston Loveland. And I look for Colston Loveland's increase of work to continue, but also interested to see if Luther Burden is more of a block to his production than Cole Kmet is, which is what we all thought he would be before the season started. And that'll do it for week 11. Make sure you tune in next week for week 12. And remember to follow us on X. The link is below in the description to get your underdog picks for hockey and your value picks for the NBA. And until next week, I hope you guys follow us and win some money and win your matchups.